Today we're going to make a caramel chocolate chip walnut bar. The recipe actually calls for Kraft caramel, so it's called a Kraft caramel bar, but I like to make things simpler, so I'm using Mrs. Richardson's caramel. But it's in a kind of a three-step process. So we are going to start out by adding 2 cups of flour to my food processor and 1.5 cups of brown sugar. I would typically be doing this by hand, mixing the ingredients by hand. You mix them, if you do it by hand, you would mix them like a pie crust. But then when I got my food processor, I decided it's a lot easier just to use the food processor. And I don't, stir this up. I just add the ingredients. So I'm going to add 1.5 cups of butter, which is 3 sticks. And you don't want your butter too soft. I've had this sitting out for a little while. It doesn't have to be really hard, but not too soft, because your ingredients will end up getting a little bit softer than what you're going to want in your food processor. And a lot of recipes that I use that call for a crust for the same bottom and top will typically use butter, and you'll do your crust similar to a crumb crust. Okay, and then we also use 1 teaspoon of baking soda, which I actually should have put in at the same time with the flour. And then calls for a teaspoon of salt, and I don't use a teaspoon, maybe a half a teaspoon. Okay, so I'm all set to go. I have sometimes not gotten this lid on completely tight, so if you don't, you're going to have flour all over the place. So it is important to make sure that your cover is down. Okay, here we go. Just either put it on or on the pulse. As I said, you do want it to be like a crumb crust, so I'm going to see how this looks here. It also calls for 2 cups of oatmeal, but I like to put the oatmeal in towards the end because I use a little bit larger oatmeal. And 2 cups of oatmeal. And then I'm just going to pulse that a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I often then just dump it into a large mixing bowl to finish mixing it off. It's a little bit more work, but I just like to make sure that the oats are mixed in, but I don't want them crushed so much. And then it also helps a little bit in knowing how much to put in your pan. And one other thing, which I often forget to do, is to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And if you do forget the vanilla, it's okay. It gives it, extra flavor, but I have made them where I made the crust, and then I remembered that I'd forgotten to put in the vanilla, so then I put the vanilla in then with the other half of the crumb mixture. So you want to press half of your mixture into a 9 by 13 pan. I think that's about half. And then the other half is going to be used for the topping. And then just press this down on the bottom of your pan. If you have little kids, they would probably like to help you with this, because they probably like to get their hands into pie crusts and cookie dough and things like that. My kids always did. Anyway, it was kind of the fun part of baking when the kids are little and they can help. I'm going to bake this in my convection oven today. If you typically use your electric oven, however, you're going to bake the crust for 10 minutes. So I'm just going to bake it for 5, and then we'll add the rest of the toppings and then finish baking it. So it should look like that when you're ready to put it in your oven, and my oven is ready. So I'm going to put it in at 325 degrees in a convection oven or 350 in an electric oven. Okay, so the middle ingredients will be 2 cups of chocolate chips, 1 cup of chopped almonds. Now you can either get the pre-cut or you can chop them. And I don't like to have them too small, so I like to cut them. Or some of the chopped walnuts that I get are, you know, fairly large. I think in different cookies or like these bars, it's nice to be able to taste the almonds rather than having them, I mean the walnuts, rather than having them, you know, chopped too finely. So, and it calls for 1 cup of chopped walnuts. And as I said before, they're called Kraft caramel bars, but if you have time and you want to get a bag of the Kraft caramels and unwrap all of the caramels, and then you have to melt them in milk, that's okay. But I prefer, when I'm doing this, it's just a lot easier, and using Mrs. Richardson's caramel, the results are just as good, and it takes less time. And one day when I was making some bars in the morning, and whether it's age or whether it's just that they're putting, you know, the lids on tighter, but it really hurt my hand when I was trying to get it off, get the cover off. So one of my friend's daughter was just starting to sell Pampered Chef, and one of the really cool items from Pampered Chef is this piece of equipment that helps get any kind of lids off, depending on what the size is. So I decided I would order one of these, and it comes off that quickly, which is really nice. And then with our caramel, I just heat it up in the microwave for about 30 seconds or so until it's a little bit better than that for drizzling on that middle layer. Okay, so this is our first layer, very hot. And you can just start putting your toppings on, your middle layer on, as soon as you get it out of the oven. So as I said, we're going to use about 2 cups of chocolate chips. If you buy an 11-ounce bag, that's about 2 cups. With me buying these huge bags, you don't have to worry about having just the right amount of your ingredient when you're measuring. So you can kind of keep it away from the edge of your pan, otherwise those chocolate chips are going to melt. And then we're going to add our walnuts. Cover the chocolate chips. My kids are going to be coming home for Memorial Weekend, which will have already passed when this show airs, but they enjoy having lots of different treats, so this will be one of the treats that they'll be able to enjoy this over the weekend. And then we're just going to take the caramel and just drizzle that. Again, try not to touch the side, because then they're harder to cut when it's time to cut. And I think these are 17-ounce jars, but you can just drizzle as much as you like, just to cover. And go back and forth, but you don't need the whole jar. So probably about actually 3/4 of the jar. you'll use. And then we're going to then just put the rest of the crumb topping on, just so it's covered. Sometimes I actually use a little bit more than half of the recipe on the bottom, which is fine too, because if you even use a quarter or a third on the top, it's plenty. And after you finish getting the topping on, you can just press it down lightly. You don't want to have it smashed down, but just lightly so that it adheres to your topping or the middle toppings. And then with the butter in there, it will set up nicely as it bakes. So we are all set, and as I said before, we're going to bake them in the convection oven for 10 minutes, and if you use your electric oven, then you'll bake for 20 minutes. Okay, my bars are done, and this is what they should look like. Now when I take my bars out, they're going to be brown on top. Sometimes they're going to start bubbling around the edges, so you'll know when they're done. Usually before I cut them, I will often put them in the refrigerator and let them firm up. But keeping in mind, if you then try to cut them right away, they're really going to be hard with that caramel in there. So bring them, back to not totally room temperature, but easier for them to cut. And this is a plate that I already have cut from some other bars that I made, and you can really cut them into whatever size you want. About a 1-inch square piece. Looks little, but they are really rich with the chocolate chips and the walnuts and the caramel in there, so you really don't need a very large piece. So when I cut my 9x13 pan, I will typically cut them in 6 or 7 long rows, and then 8 to 10. So basically cut 8x10 or 7x10, but get the desired piece that you would like. So from a slice of heaven, happy cooking.